Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This 30-minute podcast features a new author interviewed by me every single day, 365 days a year, for about 30 minutes. I am also the publisher for Zibby Books, which publishes 12 books a year in fiction and memoir. Our books are already out now. You can check it out on zibbybooks.com. And we have a magazine called Zibby Mag, where we have lots of wonderful essays and lifestyle features. That's at zibbymag.com. We have classes at zibbyclasses.com. And I recently opened a bookstore in LA called Zibby's Bookshop at 1113 Montana Avenue at 11th Street in Santa Monica. I hope that you are able to enjoy some of our other offerings. But this here podcast is the basis of all of it and started in 2018. And no matter what I do, this is basically my favorite thing. Enjoy. Emmanuel Iduma is the author of I Am Still With You, A Reckoning with Silence, Inheritance, and History. Emmanuel was born and raised in Nigeria, where he trained as a lawyer. He is the author of A Stranger's Pose, a travel memoir, and The Sound of Things to Come, a novel. He is a recipient of a Wyndham Campbell Prize for Literature and has contributed nonfiction and art criticism to Granta, the New York Review of Books, Aperture, N+1, Art Forum, among other places. He lives in Lagos, and by the way, his hotel room was delayed, so we started this podcast with him in a hotel lobby, which you'll hear was quite loud. Actually, maybe I deleted it. And then we moved upstairs to his room where he finished the podcast. So when we joke around about that, that is what we are talking about. Welcome, Emmanuel. Thanks so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss I Am Still With You, A Reckoning with Silence, Inheritance, and History.
Thank you so much, Zibby. It's nice to be here.
Nice to have you. Can you please tell listeners what your book is about?
Thank you. So I Am Still With You, which is A Reckoning with Silence, Inheritance, and History, is a book that is based on the Nigerian Civil War that happened between 1967 and 1970. After the war, my uncle, who I was named after, eventually didn't come back. And so in the first sense, the book is an attempt to figure out what happened to my uncle. But it's also a book where I write about my family and my life in the way in which it intersects with Nigerian history and the current Nigerian political climate. Yeah.
So you've had such an interesting background. You lived in New York for 7 years. You were born in Nigeria, came to New York for 7 years, which must have been like, what is that even like for you to leave where you're born? Like, it's crazy enough here for me to navigate. I've lived here my whole life. You came for your art criticism degree, is that right?
Yes.
And then decided to pack everything up and leave right before the pandemic, basically, and come. Talk about that sort of juxtaposition of the two sort of cultures and what it was like when you were here.
I think that, it was only in retrospect that I began to realize how shocked I was by New York in the first place. I mean, my first, I would say 2 years or 3 years even, were really just years in which I was trying to survive on all kinds of levels, because New York is not just an expensive city, but it's also an intense city. So you have to always be on top of things, really, in order to make it work. So the first thing that really happened for me was that I realized that I was away from home, and all the things that I'd taken for granted in Nigeria, access to family, access to a couch you can sleep on, that kind of thing, were suddenly gone. But also that it was a completely different life from the one I had lived in Nigeria. In Nigeria, I trained as a lawyer. And so my education up till when I came to New York, or by the time I came to New York, was very, illegal in that sense. And coming to New York and having to do a program in which I had to see a lot of exhibitions, write about them, think about philosophy or literature or, art history, all of those fields in a way that I'd never done, was actually quite intense, in a good way, of course, intellectually, for sure, stimulating, but also demanding. And a time came, in my case, a time comes really when people just have to ask themselves, do I want to commit to New York? I feel like it has happened for many people, even Americans.
Yes.
Do I want to commit to New York for the long term, or do I feel that, I want to be elsewhere. And for me, that was a very easy decision to make because, I wanted to be closer to my family. I felt that Nigeria had more for me, both intellectually and culturally, than New York or America or any other part of America. This was what prompted my leaving, and it was quite fortuitous because this was just, 3 months before the lockdown.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I studied a lot of art history in college, I have to say, and spent many, many hours. They had this whole gallery of like hundreds of images of different pieces of
Yeah.
art. And we had to memorize like the name, the artist, the date,
Oh, wow.
and where it was from. And then we were like, had to regurgitate all of that. And I just spent hours.
Yeah.
People were there all night, just like, and I would like cover it up. And then anyway, this is my art history.
I didn't have that experience. No,
Oh my
that
gosh.
wasn't.
Oh my gosh. That was tough. That was like in my intro class. It got better after that, but still.
Yeah.
What type of art are you most interested in, or what even prompted you? I know we're going to talk about the book, but I'm just happen to be very curious about this.
Yeah.
What type of art brought you here, and like what are you most interested in on that front?
I had, before coming to New York, had an experience. I mean, for a few years of traveling with photographers who would travel from one part of the African continent to the other by road. And that was really how I got into all of this, really into art, visual art, because I would have to write about being on the road. And I just became quite interested in the idea of taking photographs or writing about photographs as they were being taken. And so photography is the language that I feel like I have most spoken or written about, in a sense. I mean, of course, I've also written about other forms of art, but I feel like if I would look at the writing that I've done in the past 10 years, most of it will really be around photography, really. Yeah.
I love photography.
Yeah.
I used to do photography. I used to study photography. I love going to photography exhibits. And speaking of photography, you have these amazing photos in here. Wait, hold on. Let me find one. Although I don't know why I'm going to hold it up when we're on a podcast, but or why I need to show you when you're the one who put it in here. But anyway, at first, I mean, okay. So for people listening, I won't even describe it. It's just a really beautiful picture of men in the military facility, sort of training for the army, right, in Nigeria back in the day. Yes. And this is part of the story of your family's history and how you were uncovering everything and wondering what it was like for people in your family, uncovering all the things you were curious about. And as you write about it, as you mentioned earlier, you talk about these personal things about your own childhood. And one thing I particularly responded to is your homesickness at boarding school. I have a son at boarding school who's been there for several years. And, he was quite sad at the beginning. He's gotten older now, obviously, as we all do. But that homesickness, it just broke my heart. I was like, come home, like the worst. But you also, you lost your mom at such a young age, and I'm so sorry about that. And you write about that beautifully when you were 4 years old and what it was like to sort of carry that loss around with you. Can you talk about your most painful memories here now that we've known each other for 10 minutes?
I think I would. The writing about boarding school was such a clarifying thing for me because I was writing about that in the context of faking this illness while I was in boarding school, right?
Nice job.
And it's quite it's quite vivid, right, for me even now when I just sort of had this strong sense that I wanted to be anywhere else, especially I wanted to be home, but boarding school, right? And would start hitting my head on this, like quite intense, actually, hitting my head against like the goalpost so that I would develop a headache and then go to the sick, as they called it, the sick bay, and then get like a permission. And for some reason, the nurse on duty believed me and wrote like a prescription for me, and I took it to the administrative building and got an exit to go home. And when I got home, of course, my parents immediately said, "You just say you wanted to come home," because clearly I wasn't ill, right? But the sense, I think like I don't know how to talk about the most painful memory I've had, but I do think that homesickness or the feeling of being away, I feel like it's a very big thing, or has been a big thing for my writing. How do I write about that acute sense of being elsewhere, being in a place other than where you feel like you belong? And it's of course, for someone like me who migrated voluntarily, it's not as acute or as painful as someone who is looking for papers or, caught between, say two countries because they don't have the right papers to move. Recently I've been speaking to friends, people who I've known for years, but just didn't know that for many years, some of them 15 years lived, without the right papers in America. And I just found it so fascinating. But my experience isn't as acute as that. Yet there was always a sense, or there has always been a sense when I'm away, especially when I was in New York and, when I was growing up and being in boarding school, that I'm longing for home. And of course, as we know, home is not just a physical location. It's a series of experiences, including, having parents and, where you keep things, how your day starts, all of those things is what forms home. And being away from that always felt quite acute for me.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how did you process the loss of your mom back at that time? Do you remember all of that? I know you wrote about it a little, but.
No, I mean, there was no, I mean, first of all, that the processing of it really, I think, in my adulthood has come with writing this book. For anyone who has lost a parent at such an early age, it's a very confusing thing, right? Because you don't even recognize that there is a part of you that is lost, so to speak, until you're old enough to have the language for that loss, right? And so I don't think that growing up, it was immediately apparent to me in the way it is now, now that I'm, a parent myself, right? That my own childhood was ruptured in that way, so to speak. But one of the incredible things that helped me and certainly helped my siblings was that, my stepmother is just, an incredible person. And so we grew up without in that immediate sense of having a maternal presence, without feeling that loss. And yet, of course, as one has gotten older, you begin to think about what if and what could have been and all of that. And so that processing is still happening. In fact, writing the book, I didn't think that I would even address it headlong, right? Until it became clear that if I was going to write about my father's passing, I had to also deal with what's the kind of griefs that my father would have carried, within himself, including the loss of his brothers, and then, of course, his wife, my mother. So I still, I don't necessarily think of it as something that has been processed as much as something that, it's the fact of my life, and I'm understanding it better as I've gotten older.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you weave in your story with all of this Nigerian history, of course. I feel like, have you read Zane Asher's book, Where the Children Take Us? Do you know her?
I know of that book and I know her, but I haven't read it. Yeah, but I know that book and I know her, yes.
Okay. Well, I feel like I learned a lot about Nigerian history first from her.
Okay.
And so it was very fresh in my mind because I probably read that within the last year. And this, of course, is a different lens through which to view some of the same sort of conflicts that she wrote about with her family and how they had experienced. So when you've done all your digging on the war and everything that's happened and your family's involvement in it, like what are some of the things you take away, or when you think about writing it, like what are the pieces of it that you're like, this, it's really important that everybody knows this?
That it certainly takes many decades for people to understand what happened, right, in the past, especially with something as traumatic, as definitive for Nigerian history as the Nigerian Civil War. I feel that sometimes we have the urge, which has been the case for Nigeria, to move on and to find ways to keep going, that in such a hurry to move on, people, or the nation in the collective sense, move past very quickly what should be dealt with. And for me, in the research and in the thinking around the war, I just realized that there were so many things that were obviously a hang up or a hangover from the war that had not been addressed in a direct sense. Such as, for instance, what happened, where are the records of people who fought during the war, especially on the side that lost, which is the side that my family was part of. right? So if there were records that had been kept of men who fought during the war, perhaps it would have been easier to figure out, what happened to my uncle. And just that very basic, even bureaucratic thing of this is the list of people who fought at this front or at this particular location is absent, as far as I know, or, as far as I could discover in my writing. And so that's one sense. So the past is never really finished in any sense, especially for the generation of people who were born after. For me, because my name is so it's part of that history, right? And it's not even it's not a traumatic name, right? It's just a simple name, Emmanuel. But this is the name or one of the names of my uncle. I have felt in writing the book that there was some kind of personal uncovering that had to be done. Why do I have this name? Or especially, what does this name now mean to me in light of the fact of the previous bearer of the name? I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's that.
It doesn't matter. It was interesting to hear. So there you go.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I do like how at the end of the book you explain it to us, and what you uncover then. Maybe things you hadn't expected. So that was great. I feel like dreams play a big part in this book. You reference many dreams throughout. Tell me about the importance of dreams in your culture, your life, yourself. Any good dreams lately?
Yeah. No, this is great because I think you're the first person that's actually pointing that out. Nobody has asked me questions about. I mean, I'd always been fascinated by dreams. In the previous book I did, that was even more of a motif. But for me, dreams are quite, just as what they are quite fascinating to me on a conceptual level, right? So dreams are these interesting experiences where you are neither in the past or in the present, right? Or even in the future. You're in this state of consciousness or semi-consciousness, however you want to define it, where chronology is not even a question, right? So you can be in China in one scene of a dream, and you can be in Lagos in another scene of the dream, and you can cross, and you can know what people are thinking even without them speaking. So it's always been this place or for me, it's always been this place really of great narrative, so to speak. When I think of dreams for this book, I hoped that I wasn't too obvious with my with my interest in dreams, but one of the first things that was said to me in relation to my uncle was that he had been the oldest member of the family who would automatically in our culture be the head of the family, of the extended large family, kept having these recurring dreams where my uncle would appear to him. And for them, that immediately signaled that his spirit was not, at rest. And so they had to perform a ritual that would appease him, so to speak. And this is not something that people who believe in it take for granted. It's not a joke, right? Once that kind of thing happens, you go to the ritual. And so that's even for them how they knew or felt that he had actually died. Because if a person is not dead, they wouldn't appear in that recurring way. But also, I began to have dreams about my father once he passed. Not so much lately, but in the first year, I would have all this. I think it was more of a nightmare. Really, it was just the strange feeling of loss, right, where you want to claim someone or have them return to life, and the only way you can access that is by dreaming about them or willing yourself to imagine them in a dream state. But all in all, I think that how I think about dreams in relation to the book now is just how they allow us to access parts of ourselves that are not visible to us. I mean, of course, there are people who believe that dreams are foreshadowings of what is to come, or, if you have a terrible dream, then something bad is about to happen. But I don't think about it that way. Mostly, I think of my dreaming as a way to access what is otherwise unavailable to me. And this is not even I hope it's not a psychoanalytical sense. Um, I think it's just the fact of dreaming that for me, when now I have a dream about my father, sometimes, especially now after 5 years, it's quite benign. It's just something that maybe we're somewhere together and all that, and it's actually at this point something nice, because you can see that person again, you can have some kind of experience with them that's and many times when I'm having the dream, I know this person is actually not alive. And so it's this, fascinating thing to me that I never quite, yeah, it's difficult to talk about because dreams are just always fascinating. You never know what state you are in when you're dreaming. Yeah.
It's true. I mean, you'd think we would all talk about it all the time. Like, oh my gosh, can you believe what just happened last night? Like, I had a crazy dream last night where like Tom Cruise went crazy and we all had to like wrangle him.
Wow.
Like and I was like, when's the last time I even thought about Tom Cruise? Why on earth was he in my dream? Do you know what I mean? Like, whatever. It's just crazy. But I believe too, I mean, sometimes, my grandmother will come say hi and I wake up and I feel like I've just been given like a warm hug, like it's such a nice, it's such a nice visit.
Yeah.
It is, if it's my imagination or a spirit or whatever it is, it's nice. It's a nice feeling.
I believe it's mostly our imagination memories. Yeah.
But who knows? You never know.
Yeah.
Life is crazy. Humans are weird. Who knows what's out there? All right. Well, Emmanuel, thank you. Thank you for the time. Thanks for this hotel visit we had here. And I hope you have a nice trip wherever you are. And
thank you.
And thanks for your time. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Zibby. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay.
It's my pleasure.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.